Hello, I'm Lottie, I'm a full-time stained glass artist and welcome to my YouTube channel. Welcome back to some of you. I know it's been a while since my last video and I am very sorry about that. I've only been full-time since about December 2022. And in my head I thought, as soon as I go full-time, I'm gonna have so much time to make YouTube videos and all this Instagram and extra content, and then you realise that your time just disappears and I don't know where it's gone. I think now I've got myself into a bit of a routine and I'm on top of my workload, and now I have set time that I'm able to dedicate to making YouTube videos. We'll see how long this lasts. So I had this idea that I want to create a YouTube series, because when I was first starting out making stained glass, you sort of have to jump from YouTuber to YouTuber to find content that carries on from the full process of making a stained glass piece. And sometimes you find there's like little segments in the middle that will get missed out. I thought, I'm going to dedicate an entire piece, film the entire process from start to finish, and that way it will be a really cohesive, in-depth tutorial on how to make a stained glass piece. This is going to be the biggest piece I've ever worked on, so there's probably going to be some mistakes along the way, but you know, this is how we learn. The way that I'm hoping this series is going to work, I'm going to create separate YouTube videos of a really in-depth explanation to each sort of little section that I work through when making a stained glass piece. So the first video, which is this video, is going to be about how I actually design the template, the programs I use and how I print it out, and then the next video will talk more about glass. The programs I'm going to be talking through are mainly Photoshop, Cricut, and I'm also going to touch on Procreate as well. I've had a request, and I know a lot of stained glass artists do use Procreate. I moved on to Photoshop because it's just a program I'm more comfortable with, but I know Procreate is so accessible for everyone. So without further ado, let's get into it. So I realised I've not even mentioned what I'm creating yet, and that is The Legend of Zelda stained glass design. So as I mentioned, I'm doing this as the biggest piece I've ever done, so I'm designing it on an A3 piece of paper. I'm really loosely sketching out a design. Anything that comes from my head, I'm just getting it on the page so I can see something visual and I know the path that I want to go down. However, quite early on, I do like to set my boundaries and the shape of the piece, and that just means everything I'm going to roughly sketch, I know it's going to be within the size and the scale that I want to work with. I'm not thinking too much about how I'm going to make individual cuts of glass. I more or less just want to come up with a drawing of Link and Zelda in a composition that I like and one that I think will look well in a stained glass window. So I'm actually importing images here. So I've imported an image of the sword and of the logo, and then I just draw around it. I don't use these exact images, but it gives me an idea of how I want them to look. So as you can see, I redraw the design over and over and over again. I think I must have done it 3 or 4 times while creating this template, and this just really allows me to refine certain bits a little bit more. With each redraw, I'm starting to think more about glass placement, and this is important because I don't have a ring saw, I only have a grinder, so I'm limited in the shapes that I can make. So while I'm creating all these shapes, I'm thinking at the back of my mind what I can do and what I can achieve and cuts I know I can make. So once we reach this stage and my template is drawn out in red. The reason I do it in red, it's an old technique from animation. When you're doing a rough drawing of a keyframe in animation, you would do it in colour like red. This was actually it didn't show up on the scanning in. I've digressed. Now we're going to talk about the tool that I use. So here I'm using the curvature pen tool. I have it set to, I think on here I have it set to 12, but I've since then changed the size to 10. This tool is basically a point and click tool, and it makes curves, and it allows me to design every single line and every single shape exactly how I want it to be, which is why I love it so much when I'm making templates. I think it's actually a shape tool, so I'm creating shapes with a vector line rather than using a brush. It means every individual shape has its own layer, so then I can easily edit any line that I've made without having to use the erase tool and accidentally rubbing out a line that I don't want to remove. So that last bit was shown in real time because it allows you to see really how long it takes me to put a line down before I decide I like its placement. So if you're using the curvature pen tool and you double click on a point rather than just clicking once, it will give you a sharp angle rather than a curve, which means that it can pretty much do any shape in any line that you need it to. What I've done for this sword here is, so I have designed one half of it and then I've duplicated it, flipped it over, so then it layers on top and it's a perfectly symmetrical sword. Again, what I briefly touched on earlier, what's possible with me to achieve a meter cut without the use of a ring saw and just using my grinder. I can't get in really deeply in between the cut between the noses and the top lip, so I've done a gentle curve that I'll be able to grind out, and then when it comes to copper foiling the piece, I can add a little bit of extra copper foil to sort of trick the piece into making it look like there's a really sharp slick angle there. When you're designing your template, it's important to make sure, as much as you can, all the little corners and edges that stick out, because your Cricut's going to follow every single exact line that you put down. So you just want to take the little extra bits that overhang and make them disappear, just so you've got a neater cut and an easier template to work with. Once I'd added all the colour in my design and I'd pretty much finished it, I wasn't happy with how the sword looked. And this is the great thing about using the pen tool, because although I've done all of the lines already around the sword, I don't have to erase them. I can just drag and move them to somewhere else without causing too much disruption to what I've created already. And then once I've finished the piece and added in all the colour, this is when I'll come in with the final painting details, like the copper foil that I want to add on the nose, the painting in the ears, and Link and Zelda's eyes. And that is pretty much how I design my stained glass templates using Photoshop. So now we've gone through all the basics on Photoshop, I'm going to show you how I used to design templates on Procreate. As you can see, my iPad is incredibly old. I think it is the 2015 iPad Pro. Speed-wise, it's not actually too bad, but the battery just does not last at all, which is why I've moved over to Photoshop on my computer, but I prefer Photoshop anyway. It's a bigger program and I have slightly more control over the templates that I'm designing. However, Procreate is a perfect program to use. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It comes from personal preference, and also budget wise, Procreate, when I bought this, it was £10 standalone app. Photoshop, you're looking at paying £15. I think that's probably the cheapest you can get, at £15 a month, every month to use it. And ease of use, Procreate is so much more simple compared to Photoshop. Photoshop, I've been using it for about 10 years and I still have no idea what I'm doing half the time. But anyway, I will show you how I used to use Procreate. So the first thing I used to do, again, I'm not a full whiz on this. Some of my methods might be a bit weird, but I get the result that I want and that's all that matters. So first thing, I create an A5 screen size, and the reason I do that is because I have access to A5 paper and I want to at one point get this screen size to be exactly A5 so I can design my brush to be the right size. So to start with, let's talk about the brush that we're going to use. So this brush I have has multiple pressure variants depending on how hard I push down. It's not a particularly stable brush, so if I want to draw slowly, because I'm quite shaky, the line is pretty shaky and it tapers off and all sorts of things that I don't want when I'm designing a template. So let's make a brush that I do want. So I like to use the Studio Pen brush. It's a brush that comes free with it. That's all you need. Pretty much any brush would work. And I want to turn the stabilization up. So if I clear that off, the stabilization, this is what's going to make it smooth when I'm drawing slowly. And I do draw quite slowly. If you're quite fast, you don't want the stabilization too high because it will not properly follow where your brush is going. So depending on how quickly you draw, play around with it and see where you want the stabilization to be. You can always change it if it's not right. And then I want to go into taper and just take those tapers off the end, so it's just like a nice little flat brush, but we still have the issue of pressure. And we can change that by going into our settings, going to preferences, pressure and smoothing, and just turning that. Yours will probably look like this. You may have altered it a little bit depending on how hard or soft you draw, but you want to take all those points way up to the top, so it just gives us one solid line. The next thing is the brush scaling. So when I draw a line and then when I zoom in, it changes my line thickness, and I don't want that to happen. So I go back into settings and back into preferences and turn on dynamic brush scaling, and then it won't affect the thickness of my line, which is perfect. So we have a great brush with a great line thickness ready to draw our templates with. The only thing is, what size do we want the brush to be? This is where I'm going to use this piece of paper, and I have these are pattern foiling pattern shears. What they do is they cut out, there's two blades there and one blade at the bottom, and they cut out essentially enough space from your pattern to give leeway to the copper foil. I'm going to use these as a guide and cut out a thin strip. So that is the thickness that the scissors cut out, and that is the thickness that I want my Cricut to leave out. The reason I set my canvas to A5 is now so that I can scale it to this piece of A5 paper here. There's probably an easier way to do this, but I don't know how, so I do it this way. But it's one of those things, once you've worked out once, you don't need to do it multiple times. So I'm going to actually stick that down to my iPad to make it a little bit easier. And now I'm going to try and find the right brush thickness. Okay, I'm going to have to stop you there. I just spent all that time explaining how I need this to be exactly A5 size, measuring it with an A5 piece of paper, only to zoom into it and not make it A5. In me doing this, I've actually got my pen size wrong. So every time I quote my pen being 4%, it's actually closer to 6 to 7%. So that's way too thick. So that one, again, way too thick. Keep going down, we're at 4%. 4% is probably, yes, we're gonna go for 4%. This is sort of a trial and error thing. I did a similar thing on my Photoshop to work out what size I wanted to use, and I ended up changing it after a few templates because I found it was too big, so I went a bit smaller. But that's sort of how, to give you an idea of how thick you want it to be, is basically this thin piece of paper, which if I measure very difficultly because it's so thin, I'd say it's probably about 2 millimeters thick. So that's the sort of size that you want to go for. So now I've got my brush sorted, I can go over to my gallery and open up my file. So this is I just imported the sort of base outline from Photoshop. I would create a new layer, turn the opacity of this one right down, and then with this layer I would just simply sketch over everything in my design and make the template the way that I would. Now, it's sort of the reason I prefer the pen tool on Photoshop is because I don't have to concentrate as much, to be honest. When I'm doing this, I'm only doing it rough because I know I'm not going to use it. I have to put a lot of thought into exactly where my lines are going to go, and like I've missed the join there, you know, little things like that. Whereas if I was in Photoshop and I was using my pen tool, I can sort of just tap and I don't have to hold my breath while I'm drawing. But again, that's probably easily rectified by, if I go back into my pen, I want to turn the stabilization up a little bit more because I'm doing quite long lines quite slowly. Let's see if I can do this without messing it up. I mean, it's not bad. It's not bad. I'm just a disgusting perfectionist. Whoops, which is why I struggle so much when I'm doing it like this. And I also find that, well, it's just getting messy now. Hopefully all this has made sense, but if you do have any more questions about how to use Procreate when designing a saying less template, just drop me a question in the comments and I'll do my best to answer it. Okay, so now we've made it to the stage where the template is complete. It's ready to be printed off and also exported into the Cricut design space. So the first thing I want to do to print this out is I'm going to actually turn the colour layer down. This is purely because it's a waste of ink. I want the colour to be there so I can see what colour glass that I need to use and I don't have to do it from memory, but I also don't want to waste loads of ink and do really saturated colours. I'm also going to set the print size to A3 because that's what my printer can print out and what I'm working with, and I want to scroll down in Photoshop and make sure that scale to fit media is not selected because I want the printed image to be exactly the same size as the image that's on the canvas in Photoshop. So now I'm going to get this ready to be exported into the Cricut design space. First thing you want to do is a really important step, and that is actually to turn the background off. This is going to make your life so much easier when you import it into Cricut because you're not going to have to click on each individual section to remove the blank space. I'm also going to turn off any colour and any paint layers that I have on, so I've just got the outline that is ready to be imported into my Cricut. Then I want to export. A quick export, and you want to make sure it is a PNG and not a JPEG. PNGs are able to have transparent backgrounds, which is what you want. And then I'm going to go and open up my design space. The first thing you want to do is go to your import page and import the image. Once the image is imported, we just leave it as simple because it is only a black image, so you just keep it as simple. And on this background remover section, we don't need to do a thing because we removed the background in Photoshop. So you just want to apply, and we just want to cut the image. We don't want to print because we've used our own printer to print it with the colour on. So this is where things start to get a little bit weird, but if you want to use the printed out template as a reference guide, you need to do this step or else your sizes will be mismatched. I've already done this previously, but you'll need to upload an image that is the same size as the canvas size you were using in Photoshop. So for me, I used a portrait A3 image, so I'm going to need to upload a portrait A3 image into my design space. When they're both on my canvas, I want to zoom out and I want to take the template design and make sure it's completely covered by the A3 sheet of paper. I'm then going to resize both of them together to the exact size of A3. So this means it's going to make my template smaller but within the constraints of an A3 piece of paper. I hope that makes sense. I understand I'm probably not wording this the best, but it's hard to explain how I came across this method and found that it worked for me to get everything the exact size that I wanted it to be. And once they're resized, I just go ahead and delete the A3 piece of paper. I don't need it anymore. And now I can set my Zelda piece to print. I just want to make sure I've got it set to A3 sheet of paper because that's the size I'm working on, and connect it to my maker. And I'm just using copy paper, just a standard size, the default settings, and then print. Thank you so much for making it all the way to the end of the video, and I really appreciate you watching. If you would like and subscribe to my channel, that would be absolutely great. And if you're a super Legend of Zelda fan like me, I will upload the template to my website so you can purchase it. Hopefully no one gets around to making it before I do, but you probably will because, as I said, my scheduling is not great. Fingers crossed the next one will be out very soon, where then we will talk more about glass selection, attaching the template to the glass, and cutting the glass, the most exciting part of the whole thing. And thanks so much for watching this video. Have a wonderful day.